If you haven't seen the film The King's Speech, I can recommend it. The king in question was George VI, the father of our recently departed Queen Elizabeth, and is played by Colin Firth. The plot revolves around his difficulties with public speaking. He stammered and had speech blocks. This was problem enough when he was second in line to the throne. His wife sought help for him from a therapist of sorts named Lionel Logue, who's played in the film by Geoffrey Rush. Bertie, as he was, had the crown thrust upon him when his older brother abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. The film's climax follows shortly after when he has to deliver a speech on radio announcing that Britain is at war with Germany. I like the way the stop-start relationship between these two men is portrayed, one royal, the other not merely a commoner but an unqualified Australian. But this is not what I'm on about. Rather, I want to comment on the content and context of the speech itself. I would prefer to let Colin do the reading, but the dramatic pauses make it rather long, and in the interests of brevity and copyright, I'll give you a faster rendition before commenting on it. In this grave hour, perhaps the most fateful in our history, I send to every household of my peoples, both at home and overseas, this message, spoken with the same depth of feeling for each one of you as if I were able to cross your threshold and speak to you myself. For the second time in the lives of most of us, we are at war. Over and over again we have tried to find a peaceful way out of the differences between ourselves and those who are now our enemies. But it has been in vain. We have been forced into a conflict. For we are called, with our allies, to meet the challenge of a principle which, if it were to prevail, would be fatal to any civilized order in the world. It is the principle which permits a state, in the selfish pursuit of power, to disregard its treaties and its solemn pledges, which sanctions the use of force or threat of force against the sovereignty and independence of other states. Such a principle, stripped of all disguise, is surely the mere primitive doctrine that might is right. And if this principle were established throughout the world, the freedom of our own country and of the whole British Commonwealth of Nations would be in danger. But far more than this, the peoples of the world would be kept in bondage of fear, and all hopes of settled peace and of the security of justice and liberty among nations would be ended. This is the ultimate issue which confronts us. For the sake of all that we ourselves hold dear, and of the world order and peace, it is unthinkable that we should refuse to meet the challenge. It is to this high purpose that I now call my people at home, my peoples across the seas, who will make our cause their own. I ask them to stand calm and firm, united in this time of trial. The task will be hard. There may be dark days ahead, and war can no longer be confined to the battlefield. But we can only do the right as we see the right, and reverently commit our cause to God. If one and all we keep resolutely faithful to it, ready for whatever service or sacrifice it may demand, then with God's help we shall prevail. May He bless and keep us all. I don't know who wrote the speech, but it was carefully thought through. It was delivered 20 years and 2 weeks before I was born, and yet in so many ways it could have been from a different historical era. Yes, I know what you are thinking. But many ideas in it are so foreign to our times, like the idea of going to war over a matter of principle. Now, of course, nearly every warring nation claims its cause is just, but in this case, I think it was. Britain and France had been negotiating with Hitler as step by step he threw off the terms imposed on Germany at Versailles. So far they had avoided war by acceding to his demands, and in the infamous Munich Agreement, they even let him take the Sudetenland against the will of the government of Czechoslovakia. He soon broke that agreement too when he took the rest of Czechoslovakia a few months later, and now he had gone on to attack Poland. Poland was far away, on the other side of Germany. There was little Britain could do to defend it. Declaring war was almost an empty gesture, and in fact the next 8 months came to be known as the phony war, because the Allies did very little, and what they did appeared quite amateurish. But as the speech had prophesied, there were dark days ahead. The catastrophe of the Great War was fresh in the minds of many of those listening to the King. Britain entered that war as a great power and arguably still the wealthiest nation on earth. After 4 years, it had lost nearly 888,000 men, with many more maimed for life, and it was hugely in debt. Revulsion at this huge waste of life led to the growth of a large pacifist movement in the 1920s and 1930s. In 1933, the Oxford Union overwhelmingly passed a motion that this House will under no circumstances fight for its king and country. In 1934, the Peace Pledge movement attracted over 80,000 pledges on postcards. The Labour Party opposed rearmament, and Prime Minister Baldwin was afraid to openly campaign for it. The mood of the country only changed slowly in response to acts of aggression by Germany and Italy, and it was a huge step to declare war. It could not happen today. To commit to a war on behalf of a third party with no clear prospect of victory, and with no plan for how it might be achieved. And this leads to the other point, which would seem very strange today. In the speech, the king committed their cause to God. Taking the view that Hitler's actions were immoral, and that to oppose them was a moral duty, there was a belief that God would help them in their cause. Was this kind of thinking still around for Vietnam? And whatever George Bush thought when he went to war against Iraq, he was confident of the overwhelming power of the US military machine. Britain had no such grounds for confidence. Did the king, the government, or the British people really believe God would help them? Religious faith had been in decline since the late 19th century, especially in intellectual circles. Peter Hitchens attributes this large-scale loss of faith to the carnage of the First World War. By 1939, less than half the population attended church regularly. But the king was the head of the Church of England, and belief in God was still the official position. On the other side, it is arguable to what extent the atheistic views of Friedrich Nietzsche shaped the Nazi Party's ideology. He recognised that without God, there is no basis for morality. Among his many famous quotes is, "I deny morality as I deny alchemy." He believed in the will to power. We cannot know if he would have approved of Hitler's program if, like his sister, he had lived to see it, but he certainly would not have called it immoral. For those who believe in morality, is refusing to meet such a challenge unthinkable and the end of peace and liberty? While in China, President Macron recently stated that Europe should not get caught up in a disordering of the world and crises which are not ours. Clearly, he thinks that what China does with Taiwan is not his concern. In the West, there was widespread, although not universal, condemnation of Putin's attack on Ukraine. No one came to Ukraine's defence, but the USA has spent billions arming Ukraine. However, many of its citizens on both the left and the right now object to the cost and believe there should be a peace settlement. The Republicans have, at the present moment, blocked further funding. If it comes to negotiation, Russia will not give up any of its territorial gains and may even ask for more. Putin has waged an undeclared war which resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. He has bombed civilian infrastructure and even grain silos. Realpolitik would accept that all previous killings, tortures and violations be brushed over in exchange for peace. Morality does not get a seat at the conference table. Have we absorbed Nietzsche's dictum that morality went the way of alchemy? Or do we still believe that might is right is wrong, and perhaps even in a God who opposes evil? Or are we pragmatists, accepting that if the cost is too high, sometimes you have to pinch your nose and compromise? I think the king, and many of his hearers, did believe that good must triumph, and that somehow God would be on their side. Maybe their faith was shaky, but they put their lives and the nation on the line, and actions speak louder than words. The cost was very high, and it took nearly 6 years, but Hitler was defeated. Liberty and justice were saved for another day. Was that another era? Or is the King's speech still relevant today?